One Piece and Pirates of the Caribbean is actually real. From the supernatural voyages of Pirates of the Caribbean to the epic world of One Piece, we've grown up fascinated by the legendary battles between outlaws and empires. But what if I told you the most incredible characters weren't created in a writer's room? Many of the heroes and villains we love were real people who lived through events, even wilder than the movies show. Today, we're peeling back the fiction to reveal the true history of piracy, a story that will change everything you thought you knew about life under the Black Flag, democracy, equality, and the Forgotten Republic. That rewrote the rules of the sea. So, did Hollywood lie to us? Close your eyes and picture a pirate. You see a tricorn hat, a cutlass, and a parrot. You hear the Pirates of the Caribbean theme. You see Jack Sparrow stumbling across a sun-bleached deck. It is one of cinema's most enduring images, and it is almost entirely fictional. The real Pirates of the Caribbean were something stranger, something more radical, something genuinely remarkable. Between 1706 and 1718, pirates built a real republic. It was on the island of New Providence in the Bahamas. They called it the Republic of Pirates. They elected their own captains by democratic vote. They divided plunder equally among every crew member. They gave rights to women 2 centuries before the law did. They welcomed escaped enslaved people as full crew members. They invented disability compensation before governments did. This was not lawless chaos. It was deliberate. It was a reasoned rejection of the world they came from. A world of brutal inequality and imperial exploitation. A world of rigid class hierarchy and racial oppression. These so-called criminals built something genuinely radical. A society more equal than almost anything on land. In 1710, this article tells their real story. It is a story about democracy, race, gender, and freedom. Told from the bottom of the ocean up. The world that made the pirate. A sea of broken promises. To understand the Republic of Pirates, start with ordinary sailors. Life at sea, in the early 1700s, was not romantic. It was not adventurous. It was brutal and poorly paid. Britain, France, Spain, and the Netherlands controlled the seas. Their trade routes pumped enormous wealth into merchant pockets. Almost none of that wealth reached the men who sailed the ships. Sailors in the Royal Navy were routinely press-ganged into service. That means kidnapped off the street and forced to sail. No choice, sometimes for years at a time. Pay was irregular. Food was often rotten. Punishment was ferocious. Flogging, keel hauling, and hanging were standard tools of discipline. A captain's word was absolute law. Sailors had no recourse. The merchant marine was only slightly better. Merchant captains could work their crews to death without consequence. Sailors who complained were flogged. Sailors who mutinied were hanged. Historian Marcus Rediker documented this world exhaustively. His 1987 study is called Between the Devil and the Deep Blue Sea. He found the gap between captain and sailor was enormous. Roughly equivalent to the gap between a slave owner and enslaved person. Then came the War of the Spanish Succession. It ended in 1713. Tens of thousands of sailors were discharged. They received no pensions, no assistance, and no future. They were simply released with a set of skills: navigation, gunnery, combat, useful only for one civilian purpose. Within months, many drifted toward one place: New Providence in the Bahamas. No government, no military. A natural harbor too shallow for warships, but perfect for sloops. The perfect place to be an outlaw. The geography of freedom. New Providence was, in the most literal sense, a perfect hideout. Its harbor was too shallow for any large man of war. But it was perfect for the fast sloops pirates preferred. It sat directly across the main Atlantic shipping lanes. A well-armed sloop could intercept merchant ships almost daily. And in 1704, after a French and Spanish attack, it had no government. The pirate captains, who arrived after 1706, moved into a vacuum. Benjamin Hornigold, Henry Jennings, Charles Vane, Edward Teach. They did not simply import chaos into that vacuum. They built something. By 1713, Nassau had over 1,000 pirates and only 100 residents. The captains declared it the Republic of Pirates. They established the flying gang, a loose system of governance. They built a rudimentary fort to guard the harbor entrance. They established an economy, taverns, ship repair, traded plunder, and they wrote a document that would become remarkable. They called it the Articles of Agreement, the most radical social contract in the Atlantic world. The Pirate Code, democracy before democracy. A constitution born at sea. The Articles of Agreement were not vague honor among thieves guidelines. They were written constitutions, signed by every crew member, binding on the captain and the lowest sailor alike. Different ships had different versions, but the core principles were consistent across dozens of documented sets. The first and most foundational principle was this: every man had a vote, not just officers, not just senior sailors, every man. They voted on matters of consequence, including who captained the ship. A pirate captain served at the pleasure of his crew. If the crew judged him cowardly or tyrannical, they voted him out. The record is full of deposed captains. Charles Vane was deposed by his crew in 1718. He refused to attack a French warship. The crew called it cowardice. They voted him out on the spot, divided his personal belongings, and elected in his place John Rackham, Calico Jack. Every man has a vote in affairs of moment, has equal title to fresh provisions, or strong liquors at any time seized. That quote comes from Bartholomew Roberts's Articles. Roberts was the most successful pirate of the entire Golden Age. He captured over 400 ships during his career. His articles are preserved in Captain Johnson's 1724 General History. That book is held by the British Library in London. The articles also mandated what we would today call workers' compensation. Crew members injured in action received a fixed payment from the fund. Loss of a right arm, 800 pieces of 8. Loss of a left leg, 400 pieces of 8. Loss of an eye or a finger, 100 pieces of 8. This disability pay system predated British compensation law by 2 centuries. The division of plunder was equally radical. Captains received roughly double the ordinary rate, no more. Economist Peter Leeson calculated the ratio in his 2009 study. Captain to ordinary sailor on a pirate ship, 2.6 to 1. On a Royal Navy vessel, 14 to 1. On a merchant ship, often higher still. The pirates were running one of the most equal workplaces in the world. Race and the Pirate Brotherhood. Perhaps the most startling aspect of the Republic was its view on race. The world these pirates came from was built on slavery. The transatlantic slave trade was at its absolute peak. Hundreds of thousands of Africans were being transported across the ocean. Racial hierarchy was embedded in colonial law at every level. A free black person could be reduced to slavery on a white man's word. On a pirate ship, the situation was dramatically different. The pirate crews were extraordinarily multiracial by the standards of their time. Escaped enslaved people sailed alongside free Africans and Europeans. Indigenous Americans, men from a dozen nations, all sailing together. They shared food, voted together, and received equal shares of plunder. African crew members were not slaves. They were crew members, with the same rights and the same vote as any European sailor. The most powerful illustration of this is the Whydah galley. The Whydah was built in London in 1715 as a dedicated slave transport. On its very first voyage, it carried 312 enslaved Africans across the ocean. In February 1717, Black Sam Bellamy's fleet caught up with it. After a 3-day chase, the Whydah's captain surrendered. Bellamy converted the former slave ship into his flagship, and into his crew he recruited survivors of the slave ship's voyages. At the time of its sinking, over a third of his crew were African. They voted. They earned equal shares. They held full crew standing. John Julian, a 16-year-old Mosquito Indian, served as the ship's pilot. Pilot was a highly skilled, highly trusted role aboard any ship. When the Whydah sank and survivors were captured in Boston, Julian was not extended the same legal protections as the Europeans. He was sold into slavery to a man named John Quincy, great-grandfather of future U.S. President John Quincy Adams. The equality he had known on the Whydah was gone the moment he landed. The men who built the Republic. Benjamin Hornigold, the founder. Benjamin Hornigold's origins are almost entirely unknown, which is fitting for a man who made the past irrelevant. He arrived in Nassau around 1713 and quickly became dominant. He preyed primarily on Spanish merchant vessels, and in the early years he had a strict personal policy. He would not attack British ships. His quarrel was with Spain. In his own mind, he was not entirely a criminal. Hornigold was the mentor of the Republic of Pirates. He trained and guided many of the Golden Age's key figures. He personally trained Edward Teach, who became Blackbeard. He gave him his own vessel to command in 1717. He trained Samuel Bellamy. He shaped the culture of Nassau. Then, in 1718, the British Crown sent Woodys Rogers to Nassau. Rogers arrived with 7 ships, 250 soldiers, and a royal pardon. Hornigold made a decision that shocked his colleagues. He accepted the pardon And then he became a pirate hunter. He pursued his former allies with remarkable zeal. 9 of the pirates he captured were hanged in Nassau. December 12, 1718. Hornigold watched them die. He himself died in a shipwreck off Mexico less than a year later. Blackbeard, the magistrate. Edward Teach was almost certainly born in Bristol, England. The exact details of his early life remain unknown. He became not just the most famous pirate of the Golden Age. He became its elected head of government. The pirates of Nassau chose him as their magistrate. The man history depicts as terror incarnate was a law enforcement officer. The real Blackbeard was significantly more complicated than his legend. Yes, he was physically intimidating. He braided lit fuses into his beard before battle. A cloud of smoke around his head, designed for psychological impact. But the historical record shows a man remarkably reluctant to kill. His preferred tactic was intimidation, not slaughter. In 1718, he blockaded the harbor of Charlestown, South Carolina. He held the city's leading citizens hostage. His ransom demand was not gold. It was medicine for his sick crew. He was killed in November 1718 off North Carolina's Ocracoke Island. Lieutenant Robert Maynard of the Royal Navy defeated him in combat. According to Johnson's account, Blackbeard received 5 gunshots and 20 sword cuts before he finally fell. Maynard decapitated him and hung his head from the bowsprit. The death of Blackbeard was the symbolic end of the Republic. Samuel, Black Sam. If Blackbeard was the law, Bellamy was the moral conscience. Bellamy arrived in Nassau around 1716, under Hornigold's guidance. But he quickly distinguished himself from other pirate captains. He was willing to articulate, loudly, exactly why he did what he did. Johnson recorded a speech Bellamy gave to a captured merchant captain. It is one of the most remarkable political documents of the 1700s.
They rob the poor through legal mechanisms. Unfair wages, debt bondage, the slave trade. We must seize justice.
Then they prosecute the poor. They created as criminalism. The law, Bellamy argued, was simply violence directed downward.
They vilify us, the scoundrels do. They rob the poor under the cover of law, and we plunder the rich under the protection of our own courage.
Bellamy's crew was the most racially diverse recorded in the Golden Age. Over a third were of African origin. His flagship was the Whydah Galley, the repurposed slave ship. It carried men from England, Wales, Ireland, Africa, and the Americas. They voted together, ate together, divided their wealth together. On April 26, 1717, a nor'easter hit Cape Cod. The Whydah went down in the storm. It took Bellamy and 143 of his 146 crew members to the bottom. Bellamy was 28 years old. His ship lay on the ocean floor for 268 years. In 1985, underwater explorer Barry Clifford found on the wreck. He pulled up the ship's bell, cast in bronze in 1716. The Whydah Galley, 1716. The Whydah became the only fully authenticated pirate shipwreck ever found. Today, its artifacts are on display at the Whydah Pirate Museum in Massachusetts. The women who broke every rule. Anne Bonny, the pirate who chose her own life. Anne Bonny was born around 1698 near Cork, Ireland. She was the illegitimate daughter of a lawyer and his servant. By 1720, she was sailing as an active pirate crew member, not a passenger, not a prisoner, a crew member. Bonny had come to Nassau with her sailor husband, James Bonny. He became an informant for Governor Woodes Rogers. Disgusted, Anne left him and joined the pirate John Rackham. Calico Jack, they called him, for his love of colorful calico cloth. In August 1720, they stole the sloop William from Nassau Harbor. They began a 2-month raiding voyage around Jamaica and the Bahamas. Mary Read had come to the crew by a different route entirely. Born in England around 1695, she had spent much of her life as a man. She served as a footboy, then as a soldier, in the British Army in Flanders. She met and married a fellow soldier. He died. She resumed male clothing and eventually found herself on a ship. That ship was captured by pirates. She ended up on Rackham's sloop. By September 1720, the governor of the Bahamas had issued a proclamation. It named both women specifically as pirates and enemies of the crown. On October 22, 1720, privateer Jonathan Barnett caught up with the sloop. Most of Rackham's crew were drunk. They surrendered quickly. The two women were not drunk. They did not surrender. They fought off the boarding party with pistols and cutlasses. One account records that Red fired her pistol into the hold. Her own male crewmates were hiding there in fear. They were the last ones standing. At trial in Spanish Town, Jamaica, on November 28, 1720, both women were convicted of piracy and sentenced to death. Both announced they were pregnant, a legal stay of execution. Mary Read died in prison in April 1721, likely from childbirth complications. Anne Bonny simply vanishes from the historical record after 1721. No execution, no release. She disappears entirely. The significance of Bonny and Red goes beyond their individual stories. On a Royal Navy vessel, women were strictly prohibited. On a merchant ship, the same absolute prohibition applied. On a pirate ship, what mattered was willingness to do the work and willingness to stand the danger when it came. When women demonstrated the competence the pirate code demanded, the community accommodated them in ways formal society would not. 2 centuries before women could vote, these women had a share of the plunder. The end of the Republic, Woodes Rogers, and the King's pardon. By 1717, the Republic of Pirates had become a serious problem. The merchants of London and Bristol were losing significant money. Diplomatic protests were arriving from Spain and Portugal. The Crown needed to act. On September 5th, 1717, King George I issued the Act of Grace, a blanket pardon for all piracy committed before January 5th, 1718, available to any pirate who surrendered to a British official. The warning attached was equally clear: refuse and be hanged. To deliver the pardon, the Crown appointed Captain Woodes Rogers. Rogers was himself a former privateer and celebrated author. His motto for the colony is still on the Bahamian coat of arms today: piracy expelled, commerce restored. He arrived at Nassau on July 26, 1718. 7 ships, 250 soldiers. The pardon documents. Many pirates accepted. Hornigold accepted immediately. Stede Bonnet accepted and was hanged anyway when he returned to piracy. Charles Vane refused entirely and was eventually captured and hanged. Blackbeard accepted the pardon and returned to piracy within weeks. He died at Ocracoke Island in November 1718. On December 12, 1718, Rogers oversaw 9 public hangings in Nassau. Men captured by Hornigold, men who had refused to surrender. The message was unmistakable. The Republic of Pirates was over. The golden age of piracy did not end with Rogers's arrival. It simply dispersed across the Atlantic world. Some pirates fled to West Africa, others to Madagascar, others to the Indian Ocean, where they operated for years. Bartholomew Roberts had not even been in Nassau during the Republic. He went on to capture over 400 ships between 1719 and 1722. The most successful pirate of the entire Golden Age in terms of tonnage. His death off the coast of West Africa in 1722 marked the true end. The end of the Golden Age as a significant geopolitical force. But the legacy of the Republic outlasted the pirates themselves. Marcus Rodeker has argued this at length and with great force. The Articles of Agreement were one of the earliest democratic experiments in the entire Atlantic world of the early 18th century. They predated the American Declaration of Independence by over 50 years. They predated the formal abolition of slavery in Britain by nearly a century. They predated formal workers' compensation legislation by almost 2 centuries. This is not a call to romanticize piracy. These men and women were criminals. They were violent. They killed people. They terrorized merchant sailors. Their world included tremendous cruelty. Historian Arne Bialuszewski has cautioned against overreading the equality. The picture is complicated, and it should be complicated. But the complications do not cancel the remarkable parts. The Republic of Pirates elected its own leaders. It compensated its injured workers. It divided its wealth more equally than almost any enterprise of its time. And it extended full membership, with all the rights it entailed, to people the world had designated as property, as second-class citizens, as non-persons. There is a reason the myths of the Golden Age have lasted 300 years. It is not because people love criminals. It is because the pirates of Nassau touched something real. They touched the idea that a different kind of world is possible, that the rules we live under are not natural laws. They are political choices, made by people, changeable by people. The real pirates of the Caribbean were not heroes. They were desperate, violent, often cruel people, pushed to the margins of Atlantic society by the mechanics of empire. They found in piracy both survival and something resembling freedom. And within that desperate freedom, they built something extraordinary: constitutions, democracies, disability funds, multiracial brotherhoods, extraordinary by the standards of any time, extraordinary by ours. Samuel Bellamy died at 28 years old, drowned in a Cape Cod nor'easter. His ship lay at the bottom of the sea for 268 years. When they finally found it, the artifacts told a story. Coins, cannons, and personal belongings of over 100 men from a dozen countries and multiple continents, all on the same ship, all sharing the same vote and the same wage. They told the story of a floating democracy. Captain Charles Johnson wrote his General History of the Pirates in 1724. The events he described were still within living memory. His book is preserved in the British Library in London. It remains the single most important primary source for this world. Even through Johnson's complicated lens, the radicalism is unmistakable. The world told these people they were nothing. They wrote their own articles and decided otherwise. They elected their own captains, divided their own wealth, gave a vote and a share to men the world had enslaved. To women the world had disenfranchised. To the poor the world had exploited and discarded. And then the world came for them, with 7 ships, a royal pardon, and a hangman's rope. And it ended the way it almost always ends. But the articles they wrote survived. The Whydah survived. The trial records of Bonny and Mary Read survived. And 300 years later, the story of the Republic of Pirates still has the power to surprise, to unsettle, and to remind us that the map of what is possible has always been larger than the map of what is permitted.
I am a free prince, and I have as much authority to make war on the whole world as handles 100 sail of ships at sea.
Samuel Black Sam Bellamy, 1717. The pirates of the Caribbean didn't just sail for gold, they sailed for a seat at the table. In a world of masters and slaves, they chose to be brothers. The Republic of Pirates fell to the crown, but their ideas never sank. Because once you've tasted true freedom, there is no going back to the chains of the old world. Like what you saw? Smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell to never miss a story.